At my 60th birthday dinner, after my daughter-in-law mocked me and called me an ATM, I calmly asked her to apologize. But my beloved son grabbed my wrist so tightly that the pain shot straight to my heart, then said loudly in front of everyone, "She's not your daughter, Mom. Don't correct her." I folded my napkin, placed it beside my plate, and said the only thing left to say, "Fine." Then I'm not obligated to support her like a daughter either. Neither of them knew that after 6:00 a.m. the next morning, their world would begin to fall apart. You found Silent Revenge with Auntie May, and I'm so grateful you're here. Tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from your city? Your country, I read every single one. This story contains fictional details woven in for depth and purpose. Names and settings are coincidental, but everything it asks you to feel and everything it asks you to consider is absolutely worth your time. The reservation was for 7 o'clock. Harper arrived at 7:45. I heard her before I saw her, the click of heels on the hardwood floor of the Copper Grille's private dining room, the soft whoosh of a fur-lined coat being handed to the hostess. My coat. The one I had bought her last Christmas because she mentioned it once casually the way people mention things they expect others to remember and act on. She swept into the room with the kind of entrance that assumed everyone had been waiting. They had been. 30 years of payroll accounting had trained me to notice when numbers didn't add up, and Harper was 45 minutes of missing time, dressed in $1,200 of someone else's generosity. Sorry, parking was insane, she said, kissing Chase on the cheek. My sister Sandra caught my eye from across the table and pressed her lips together. Arthur Beckett, who had been Richard's closest friend for 20 years, and mine for 8 more, set down his water glass without drinking from it. He watched Harper settle into her chair, shake out her napkin, and reach immediately for her phone, and something moved behind his eyes that I couldn't quite name. Dinner started well enough. Sandra told a story about getting lost on the way to Vermont that made the whole table laugh. Chase ordered a second bottle of wine. I was almost relaxed. Then Sandra asked Harper how work was going. Harper looked up from her phone as though the question had interrupted something far more important. She tilted her head, and a slow smile spread across her face, the kind that made my stomach drop before she even opened her mouth. "Work," she said, lifting her wine glass. "Honestly, Sandra, it's the easiest job I've ever had. Turns out when your husband finds himself a walking direct deposit with a perfect credit score and automatic transfers already set up, you barely have to do anything at all." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Sandra's fork stopped halfway to her plate. Arthur set his napkin on the table with the careful precision of a man deciding something. The 2 colleagues Chase had invited suddenly became very interested in their bread. My chest burned. Not the sharp burn of humiliation. Something slower, deeper, the kind that starts in your sternum and spreads outward until your hands feel it. "Harper," I said, and my voice was steadier than I felt. "I'd like you to apologize for that." She blinked at me as though I had asked her to explain quantum physics. "For what I'm complimenting your financial organization, Eleanor." "That is not what you said." She opened her mouth, and then Chase's hand came down over my wrist. Not gently, not the way a son touches his mother. His fingers wrapped around my wrist and pressed down, and the cold air had already made my joints ache, and the pressure sent a bolt of pain straight up my arm to my shoulder. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the table at the guests, making sure they were all watching when he said it. "She's not your daughter, Mom." His voice was loud and unhurried. "Don't correct her." The pain in my wrist throbbed, but it was nothing compared to what happened to something deeper, some part of me that had spent 60 years believing that whatever else went wrong in this life, my son would not be the source of it. I looked down at his hand. Then I looked up at his face. He had Richard's jaw, Richard's eyes. He had grown up in my house, eaten at my table, been held by these same hands when he was too small to hold himself up. I said very quietly, "Take your hand off me, Chase." He let go and rolled his eyes as though I had made a scene over nothing. I picked up my napkin. I folded it once, twice laid it beside my plate. Then I looked at Chase with the same expression I used when a client's numbers didn't reconcile, and we both already knew it. Then I said, "I have no obligation to support her as one." Chase laughed. Harper reached for her phone. Across the table, Arthur Beckett did not laugh. He looked at me steadily with an expression I would not understand until Sandra called me 2 hours later and told me what he had said on his way out the door. I paid the bill. Of course I did. My card was already on file. The remaining 40 minutes of dinner passed, the way bad weather passes when you're trapped indoors. You know it will end, but every minute feels longer than it should. Chase talked too loudly about a commercial property in Stamford. Harper ordered dessert and photographed it before eating a single bite. Sandra kept refilling my water glass without being asked the way she had done since we were girls, and she understood that sometimes the kindest thing you could do for someone was simply stay close. Arthur left first. He paused beside my chair, rested one hand briefly on my shoulder, and said only, "Good night, Eleanor." Nothing else. But the way he said it, measured deliberate like a man choosing his words with the care of someone who had spent 40 years in courtrooms, made me look up at him. His eyes held something I couldn't untangle right then. I filed it away. In the car, Chase waited until we cleared the third traffic light before he started. "You embarrassed us tonight." I kept my eyes on the road ahead. The dashboard lights cast everything in pale green. "I embarrassed you. You challenged Harper in front of my colleagues, in front of Sandra. You made a scene out of nothing." My knuckles tightened on the steering wheel. The ache in my wrist from where he had pressed down was still a dull, insistent throb. She called me an automatic payment machine, Chase, at my own birthday dinner. She was joking. She was not joking. I signaled changed lanes, kept my voice flat. "And you know she wasn't. You don't correct my wife." His voice hardened into something I hadn't heard before. Not anger exactly, but the cold certainty of a man who had decided how things were going to be. "That's not your place." I felt something crack open in my chest. Not break crack, the way ice sounds before it gives way. But it is my place to pay her car payment, her credit card, her monthly allowance. I paused. Interesting where my place begins and ends. Chase's jaw tightened. He stared straight ahead and said nothing for the rest of the drive. At home, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea I didn't drink. The house felt too large and too quiet the way it always did after Richard died, and I had to relearn what silence sounded like without another person breathing in it. My phone rang at 11:43. Sandra. "Tell me you're okay," she said the moment I picked up. Her voice was tight in a way she couldn't quite hide, and Sandra had been hiding things from me since 1987. She was out of practice at failing. "I'm fine," I said. "I'm not fine. I don't know what I am." "Ellie." She exhaled hard. "Arthur pulled me aside before he left tonight. He asked me to tell you something." I straightened in my chair. In 40 years, Arthur Beckett had never passed a message through Sandra. He called directly. He showed up at the door. He did not use intermediaries. "What did he say?" Sandra's voice dropped as though the words were fragile and needed to be carried carefully. "He said, 'Watch the accounts, Ellie.' Those were his exact words. Watch the accounts." The kitchen felt suddenly very cold. I looked at the laptop sitting on the counter where I had left it that morning. Closed. Ordinary. The same machine I used every day to manage other people's payrolls, catch other people's mistakes, make sure other people's numbers told the truth. "Sandra," I said slowly, "how long has Arthur seemed worried?" A pause that lasted one beat too long. "Longer than tonight," she said quietly. "I think longer than tonight." I did not sleep. By 6 in the morning, I was already up. I put on the coffee, pressed a heating pad against my lower back, and sat down at the kitchen table with the laptop open in front of me, and the kind of stillness that only exists before the rest of the world remembers to wake up. Arthur's words had been turning in my head all night. Watch the accounts. Not call me in the morning. Not don't worry about it. Arthur Beckett had practiced law for 4 decades. He did not say imprecise things. I started with the joint checking account, the one I had set up to handle household expenses, when Chase offered to help manage bills after Richard died. It had seemed practical at the time. Generous, even. Chase was good with numbers. Or so I had believed. The first thing I did was remove Harper as an authorized user on my primary credit card. 3 clicks. Done. 31 months of charges, Nordstrom, Sephora, a spa in New Canaan I had never visited, gone in less time than it had taken her to order dessert last night. Then I canceled the automatic payment on the Porsche lease. Then the $5,000 monthly transfer Chase had described to me 8 months ago as Harper's focus fund, so she could concentrate on her interior design coursework without financial stress. I had nodded and set it up the same afternoon. I remembered feeling good about it, generous. You're giving her room to grow Ellie, I had told myself. I stopped the allowance. I called Tina Warren at Greenwich Banking and Trust the moment the branch opened. Tina, I said, I need to review every outgoing transfer authorized under Chase Voss's name on account ending in 77401, going back 22 months. A brief pause. Of course, Mrs. Voss. I can have that pulled within the hour. Would you like to come in? Please. At 9:14, my phone rang. Harper. I answered on the second ring. My card was declined. Her voice was sharp and airless like a door slammed in a small room. I'm standing at the register at Nordstrom, and my card was declined, and there are people behind me, Eleanor. I know, I said. What do you mean? You know, fix it. There's obviously some kind of error. There's no error, Harper. I kept my voice the way I kept my office-organized temperature-controlled nothing out of place. I removed you as an authorized user this morning. Your husband made it clear last night that you aren't my daughter. I'm respecting that boundary. The sound she made was somewhere between a gasp and a snarl. You cannot just do that without warning. I warned you last night, I said. You were busy with your phone. This is insane. You're being completely insane. Ask Chase to cover it, I said. He's your husband. That's how it works. I ended the call before she could answer. My hands were steady. I was almost surprised by that. I drove to the bank and sat across from Tina Warren for 40 minutes while she walked me through 22 months of statements. Tina was methodical and kind the way people become when they have delivered difficult information often enough to understand that speed is not a mercy. The authorized transfers under Chase's name totaled amounts I had approved. Utilities property tax routine maintenance on the Shoreline Drive house. And then 4 transfers I had not approved. 4 transfers in a 3-month window, each one routed to an account I did not recognize. Each one exactly $50,000. $200,000 total. I looked at the printout Tina slid across the desk. The account number meant nothing to me. The routing number meant nothing to me. The authorization signature was Chase's. Tina, I said, and my voice came out very even, very quiet the way voices go when the body decides that falling apart is not an option right now. I need to know where that account is held. Tina's expression shifted just slightly, just enough. Mrs. Voss, she said carefully, I think you may want to speak with an attorney before we go further. There are numbers that stop you cold, not because they're complicated, because they're not. $200,000, 4 transfers, 3 months. The math was brutally simple, and I had been doing math for 30 years, and I sat in my car in the parking lot of Greenwich Banking and Trust and could not make myself start the engine. The printout was on the passenger seat. Tina had given me a copy in a plain manila folder, the kind of neutral packaging people use when the contents are anything but. I stared at it without picking it up. The January light came through the windshield flat and cold, and I thought about the afternoon 18 months ago when Chase had spread those authorization forms across my kitchen table. Just in case something happens to you, Mom. He had said it with such quiet concern, his pen already uncapped, already waiting. I want to be able to help. That's all. I had signed without reading past the first paragraph, because he was my son, because Richard was gone, and Chase was what I had left of the life we had built together, and you do not forensically audit the people you love. My chest hurt in a way that had nothing to do with my back. I picked up my phone and called him. He answered on the second ring, voice warm and easy the way it always was when he didn't know yet that something had shifted. Hey, Mom, everything okay? That 1 second, that single beat of hesitation before he answered. I had dismissed it this morning. I did not dismiss it now. I need you at your office, I said, this afternoon, 2 o'clock. A pause. Shorter this time, but there. Sure, is something wrong? "We'll talk at 2," I said and ended the call. The drive to Stamford took 26 minutes. I used every one of them. Chase Voss Realty occupied the 12th floor of a glass building on Atlantic Street. The lobby had a receptionist who smiled at me with the practiced brightness of someone paid to make visitors feel expected. The carpeting was thick. The furniture was the kind that signals money without being specific about whose. I thought about the dining room table I had refinished myself the summer Richard got sick because we couldn't afford to replace it, and I refused to let it fall apart. I thought about the years I had built my client roster, one referral at a time, driving to appointments in a Honda Civic with a broken air conditioner because the business came before the comfort. Chase met me at the door to his office with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Mom," he kissed my cheek. His cologne was new, expensive. "Sit down. Can I get you anything?" "Coffee." "No." I sat. I placed the folder on his desk and opened it. "I'd like you to explain these." He looked at the printout. Something moved across his face there and gone a shadow crossing fast water, and then he reached for the whiskey decanter on his credenza and poured himself 2 fingers without offering me any. "The Hartford Project," he said, settling back into his chair with the relaxed confidence of a man who had prepared for exactly this conversation. "I told you about it, Mom. Commercial development downtown. Mixed use. I moved the capital there because the return projections were exceptional. You're going to triple that investment." He said it the way people say things they have practiced saying, smoothly. No hesitation. The right amount of enthusiasm, the right amount of reassurance. If I had not spent 3 decades watching people explain numbers that didn't add up, I might have believed him. Instead, I reached into my bag and took out my phone. I set it on the desk between us and pressed the speaker button and dialed the Hartford Development Authority. Chase's hand tightened around his glass. The phone rang twice. A woman answered, professional and brisk. I gave her Chase's name and the project address he had mentioned to me 6 weeks ago over Sunday dinner, the dinner where I had listened and nodded and felt proud of him. The pause on the other end lasted 4 full seconds. "Mr. Chase Voss," the woman said. "Yes, he made an inquiry last spring, but we never received a deposit from him. The property was sold to another buyer 2 weeks ago." The office was very quiet. Outside the window, Stamford hummed along 12 floors below, indifferent and continuous. Chase put his glass down on the desk. The small sound it made seemed enormous. "So," I said, and my voice did not shake because I would not let it shake, not here, not in front of him. "Where did my $200,000 actually go, Chase?" He looked at me across the desk, his father's jaw, his father's eyes, and behind them, something I had never seen before. Something cold and calculating and underneath it all afraid. He did not answer, and that too was an answer. 2 days passed. Chase did not call. I did not call him either. I spent those 2 days doing what I always did when something was wrong with a set of numbers. I went back to the beginning and checked everything I thought I already knew. I pulled every statement, every receipt, every transfer confirmation I could access. I made lists. I cross-referenced. I slept badly and woke early and drank too much coffee and told myself that clarity was coming, that it always came if you were patient enough to wait for it. On the 3rd morning, the doorbell rang at 10 o'clock. I opened the door and felt my breath catch. Chase looked like he hadn't slept in 2 days either. The confidence that usually sat on him like a well-fitted jacket was gone. His shoulders were pulled inward, his eyes red at the rims, his hair uncombed in a way I had not seen since he was a teenager. Standing half a step behind him, Harper looked smaller than I had ever seen her. No makeup, no designer coat. Her hands were twisted together in front of her, and when she looked up at me, her eyes were swollen from crying that had clearly been going on for some time. My heart clenched before my brain could stop it. That was the problem with being a mother. The heart moved faster. "Mom!" Chase's voice broke on the word. Actually broke like a teenage boy's, like the son I remembered before the man I no longer recognized. "Can we come in, please?" I stepped back and let them in. We sat in the living room, me on the chair by the window, the two of them on the couch across from me, close together in the way people sit when they are genuinely frightened. Chase leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles had gone white. I owe you an explanation, he said. About the money, about everything. Yes, I said. You do. He exhaled a long, ragged sound like something unraveling. The reason I moved the funds wasn't Hartford. He stopped, started again. Mom Harper is pregnant. The room tilted. 8 weeks, he said. We found out 6 weeks ago. We didn't tell you because we wanted to be sure first, but then the doctor found something. In her blood work. His voice dropped to almost nothing. Leukemia. Early stage. The oncologist at Yale New Haven said there's a treatment program in Zurich, gene therapy. It's the only option that's safe for the baby. Harper made a sound beside him, a small, wounded sound that hit me somewhere behind my sternum. She reached into her bag with trembling hands and pulled out a folded document, a Yale New Haven hospital letterhead, a doctor's name, test results, a referral letter. She held it out to me and her hand was shaking so badly the paper trembled. I took it. I looked at it. The words on the page were exactly what Chase had described. Diagnosis, prognosis, the name of a specialist in Zurich, the deposit amount required to begin treatment. $48,000, due within 2 weeks. My throat tightened so hard it hurt. I looked at Harper's face, at the fear in her eyes, at the way she kept pressing her lips together like she was trying to hold herself in one piece. And I thought, this is real. This is my grandchild. This is a young woman who is frightened and sick and asking for help. And then underneath that thought, quiet and stubborn and refusing to be drowned out, verify first. Always verify first. Harper, I said carefully, keeping my voice as soft as I could, I'm going to need to confirm this directly with Yale New Haven. Not because I doubt you, because that's how I handle anything that matters. Chase straightened sharply. Mom, there's no time for... There is always time. I said, to be certain. Your father taught me that. The room went very tense. Harper stared at her hands. Chase stared at me. Outside, the wind off Long Island Sound pushed against the windows, and somewhere in the house, a pipe knocked once, twice, and went quiet. That night, I sat by the bedroom window until past midnight watching the water. If it's real, I told myself I will pay everything, every cent, without hesitation. But 30 years of working with numbers had given me one unbreakable habit. You do not act on what you are told. You act on what you can prove. I picked up my phone and dialed Yale New Haven Hospital's main line and asked for the oncology department and left a message for the physician whose name was printed at the bottom of that referral letter. Then I sat in the dark and waited for morning and tried very hard not to think about how much I wanted the paperwork to be real. The oncology department called me back at 7:41 in the morning. A nurse, polite, efficient, told me the physician whose name appeared on Harper's referral letter was unavailable by phone, but that I was welcome to come in and speak with the department chief directly. Her name was Dr. Margaret Osei. She had reviewed my message and was expecting me. I was in my car by 8:15, 47 miles from Greenwich to New Haven. I drove them without the radio, without anything except the sound of the engine and my own breathing and the particular quality of winter light that turns Connecticut highways into something almost beautiful if you are not paying attention to where you are going. I was paying very close attention. Dr. Margaret Osei was a woman in her mid-50s with close-cropped silver hair and the kind of unhurried stillness that comes from years of sitting across from people in the worst moments of their lives. She met me in her office on the 4th floor, not a consultation room, her actual office with framed degrees on the wall and a child's crayon drawing taped beside the window. She shook my hand firmly. Mrs. Voss, please sit down. I sat. I placed Harper's referral folder on the desk between us without a word. Dr. Osei opened the folder and read carefully, turning each page with the measured attention of someone who understood that speed was not the same as thoroughness. After several minutes, she set the papers down and removed her reading glasses. Mrs. Voss, she said quietly, the physician who signed this referral letter retired from Yale New Haven 3 years ago. He has not practiced medicine here since January of 2021. The air went out of the room. Furthermore, she continued, the department seal on this document is inconsistent with our institutional letterhead. The formatting is consistent with graphic editing software. She paused. and I can confirm without violating any patient privacy laws that we have no record of a patient by the name of Harper Voss in our oncology system." I pressed my hands flat against my thighs to keep them from shaking. "Someone went to considerable effort to make this look real," Dr. Osei said. "Yes," I said. My voice came out smaller than I intended. "They did." She leaned forward slightly and placed her hand briefly over mine. "Is there someone I can call for you, Mrs. Voss?" I shook my head. My throat had closed so completely that speaking felt like pushing through concrete. I thought about Chase's voice breaking on the word mom when I opened the door 2 days ago. I thought about Harper's hands trembling so badly the paper shook. I thought about how badly I had wanted it to be real. They had looked me in the eye. They had handed me a dying woman made of paper and printer ink, and I had almost believed every word. On the drive back, my phone buzzed on the passenger seat. A text from a number I did not recognize. "Mrs. Voss, we need to talk, alone, not at the house. Please." I read it 3 times. Then I typed back Blue State Coffee. Tomorrow, 2 p.m. Blue State Coffee on Greenwich Avenue smelled like dark roast and warm wood, the kind of place where people held long meetings and called it working. I arrived 5 minutes early. Harper was already there. She was sitting in the back corner, the table farthest from the door, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup like it was the only warm thing left in the world. No designer bag, no statement coat, a gray hoodie with a fraying cuff. Her hair pulled back with the kind of elastic band that comes in a drugstore 10-pack. She looked like a completely different person from the woman who had swept into the Copper Grill 12 days ago. She looked up when I sat down, and her eyes were so swollen and raw that I felt an involuntary pang before I could stop myself. "Thank you for coming," she said. Her voice was hoarse, scraped thin. "You asked," I said. "I came. That's all this is, Harper. Talk." She nodded and stared into her coffee for a long moment, her jaw working like she was rehearsing words she had already rehearsed 100 times. Then she looked up at me and said, "I need you to know that I am not going to prison for him." I held her gaze. "Then tell me everything." She did. It came out in pieces, at first halting circular doubling back on itself, and then all at once the way confessions do when the dam finally gives. Chase had been gambling on cryptocurrency trading platforms for 14 months, not casually, obsessively the way some people drink, the way some people disappear into something that promises everything and delivers ruin. He had lost $480,000. She had not known the full amount until 3 months ago when a man named Victor Reeves had appeared at their apartment door at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night. "Victor Reeves runs a private lending operation," Harper said, and her voice dropped the way voices do when names carry physical danger in them. "Chase borrowed from him when the trading losses got too big for the regular accounts to cover. Reeves wants $500,000. He gave Chase until the end of next month." She swallowed hard. He was very specific about what would happen if Chase didn't pay. My stomach turned over. The Zurich story was Chase's idea. She continued, her voice cracking at the edges. The fake documents, the hospital letterhead, he paid someone online to create them. He told me it was temporary, that he just needed to buy time, that once he got the money from you, he could pay Reeves off and everything would go back to normal. A short broken sound escaped her. Not quite a laugh, not quite a sob. "I don't even know what normal means anymore." "And you went along with it," I said. Not an accusation, a fact. I was scared. Her hands tightened it around the cup until her knuckles whitened. "I am scared. Of Reeves, of Chase, of what Chase becomes when he's cornered." She met my eyes. "But I am more scared of federal prison Mrs. Voss. And I know enough about what Chase did to know that if this unravels, they will look at everyone standing next to him." I leaned forward slightly. "Harper, the document forgery alone carries 5 to 10 years in Connecticut. The financial fraud compounds that significantly." I kept my voice level the way I kept it when I was explaining to a client why their numbers didn't work, clear, precise, no softening. If you cooperate fully, that changes your position considerably. If you don't, it doesn't matter whose idea it was. She stared at me for 10 full seconds. Her chin trembled once violently, and then she pressed her lips together and forced it still. "There's something else," she said. She reached into the pocket of her hoodie and pulled out her phone. Her hands were shaking so badly she nearly dropped it twice before she found the file she was looking for and turned the screen toward me. A video, 40 seconds, filmed from a high angle, a closet shelf maybe, or a cabinet left slightly open. Chase standing in front of the bathroom medicine cabinet in what I recognized as my guest bathroom on Shoreline Drive, opening a prescription bottle, removing several small white tablets, replacing them with something from a small Ziploc bag, replacing the cap, setting the bottle back. The footage was grainy but unmistakable. "I filmed it 2 months ago," Harper said, and now her voice was barely above a whisper. "I didn't know exactly what he put in. I just knew something was wrong. I kept it because—" She stopped, started again, "because I've known for a while that I might need something to protect myself with." I looked at the screen. Then I looked at her. "Send that to me," I said. "Right now, and then give me every password, every email, every account you have access to that belongs to Chase." Her breath shuddered out of her in a long, uneven exhale. Then she picked up her phone and she started typing. Before I show you what Eleanor found on that phone comment 8 right now, so I know you are still here with me, because what she was about to open was not just bad news. It was proof that everything had been planned from the very beginning. Note the story ahead includes some fictional elements shaped for reflection. If that is not for you, this is a good place to step away, no judgment at all. I sat in my car outside Blue State Coffee for 4 minutes before I opened Chase's email on my phone. Harper had given me everything: the Gmail password, the secondary account he used for business, the iCloud login. She had typed each one carefully, double-checking the characters, her hands still trembling. Before I got out of the car, she had looked at me and said, "Whatever happens to me, it can't be worse than this." I hadn't answered her because I wasn't sure that was true, and I didn't believe in comfort that couldn't hold its own weight. I scrolled through the inbox, vendor receipts, property listings, a chain of increasingly frantic messages with someone identified only as VR short terse exchanges about timelines and amounts that made my skin crawl. And then near the bottom of a thread labeled Administrative Shoreline, a subject line that stopped my breath entirely. RE14 Shoreline Drive mortgage application signature pending. I pressed it open with a fingertip that had gone completely numb. The email was from a mortgage broker in Norwalk. It referenced an application submitted 3 weeks prior. The property listed as collateral was my house. My house, the one Richard and I had bought in 1998, the one I had repainted and re-roofed and refinished and kept alive through widowhood and recession and every other thing life had thrown at it. Appraised value $2.1 million. Loan amount requested $1 million. Borrower signature Eleanor M. Voss. The broker's follow-up note at the bottom of the thread read, "Application has been flagged by underwriting. Signature on file does not match the institution's existing records for this account holder. Please resubmit with notarized documentation." The application had failed. No money had moved. But someone had known the exact balance of every account attached to that property. Someone had known the appraised value, the existing equity, the correct account numbers. Someone who had sat at my kitchen table and eaten my food and called me Mom. I drove to Arthur's office without calling ahead. His assistant started to tell me he was with a client. I said, "Please tell him Eleanor Voss is here." She looked at my face and picked up the phone immediately. Arthur met me at the door. One look and he didn't say a word. He simply stepped back and let me in and closed the door behind us. I handed him my phone with the email already open. He read it standing up, his reading glasses pushed to the end of his nose, one hand gripping the back of his chair so tightly the leather creased. When he finished, he set the phone on the desk very carefully, the way you set down something that might shatter. "Eleanor," he said, and his voice had dropped into a register I had only heard from him once before the afternoon he called to tell me Richard's test results had come back. "How long have you been having the dizzy spells?" I stared at him. "A few weeks. I thought it was the blood pressure medication." He crossed the room to where I had set my bag on the side table. He looked at me, a question in his eyes, and I nodded, and he reached in and lifted out the prescription bottle I carried everywhere. He turned it in his hands, examining the label, the cap, the way the tablets shifted inside. "I want to have this analyzed," he said. "Tonight. Don't take any more of these until I call you." He looked up at me, and his eyes were frightened in a way that Arthur Beckett's eyes almost never were. Richard used to say, Chase was the smartest person in every room he walked into. My throat closed. "I think," Arthur said quietly, "he's been planning this for much longer than either of us understood." Arthur called at 7:14 in the morning 3 days later. I was already awake. I had been awake since 5, sitting at the kitchen table with untouched coffee and the particular kind of exhaustion that comes not from lack of sleep, but from too much thinking. When his name appeared on my phone screen, my hand moved to answer it before I had consciously decided to. "The lab results came back," he said without preamble. "Eleanor, the tablets in that bottle, approximately 1/3 of them, had been replaced with a sedative medication. A low dose, but enough." I set my coffee cup down very carefully so I wouldn't drop it. A sedative medication taken daily alongside blood pressure medication would cause exactly what I had been experiencing for weeks. Mild dizziness, occasional difficulty concentrating, a fogginess that lifted by mid-morning and returned by evening, predictable enough that I had attributed it to stress, to age, to the ordinary indignities of a body that had been running hard for 60 years. It had not been stress. It had not been age. "He needed me confused," I said. My voice came out flat and strange, like someone else was using it. Not incapacitated, just unreliable enough that people would start to wonder. "Yes," Arthur said. "I think that's exactly right." We drove to the Greenwich Police Department together. Arthur had called ahead and asked specifically for Detective Ray Kowalski in the Financial Crimes Unit, a man Arthur described on the drive over as someone who understood that evidence mattered more than outrage. Kowalski was in his late 40s, broad-shouldered, with the unhurried manner of someone who had seen enough urgency to know that most of it was counterproductive. He shook my hand, offered coffee, and when I declined, simply opened a legal pad and said, "Start from the birthday dinner. Tell me everything in order." I did. It took 40 minutes. Kowalski did not interrupt once. When I finished, he looked at his notes, then at Arthur, then back at me. "What you've brought in today is substantial, Mrs. Voss. The medication substitution, if the lab results hold up under chain of custody, that's unlawful administration of a controlled substance. Felony under Connecticut statute." He tapped his pen against the pad. "Combined with the mortgage fraud, filing the financial transfers, and the documentary forgery, you're looking at multiple serious charges." "What happens now?" I asked. "Now it moves carefully," he said. "I'll need to subpoena the bank records to establish the transfer trail. We'll do a forensic comparison of the signature on that mortgage application against your known samples. The lab sends the medication analysis through our own channels to establish chain of custody." He looked at me steadily. "I won't promise you a timeline, but I will promise you I'll treat this like what it is, which is serious." I signed the report. My hand was completely steady. Outside on the sidewalk, my phone rang. A Greenwich number. I recognized my neighbor, Patricia Moore, who grew roses along her back fence and always waved when I checked the mail. "Eleanor, honey." Her voice was warm and careful in equal measure. "I ran into Chase this morning at the farmer's market on Arch Street. He seems so worried about you. He mentioned you've been confused lately, forgetting things." A pause waited with concern that wasn't entirely her own. "Are you doing all right, sweetheart?" I looked at Arthur standing beside me on the sidewalk. His jaw had tightened the moment he saw my expression. "I'm doing just fine, Patricia," I said. "Thank you for calling." I ended the call. The rage that moved through me then was clean and cold, and clarifying, the kind that doesn't make you loud but makes you absolutely certain. "He's already started," I said. Arthur nodded. "Then we move faster." Patricia Moore was not the last. Over the next 4 days, 7 people contacted me, neighbors, a longtime client, 2 members of the business association I had belonged to for 11 years, and my accountant of 8 years who sent a carefully worded email asking whether I was planning to scale back in the coming year. Each message was warm. Each one was worried. Each one had somewhere inside it the fingerprints of the same conversation. Chase had been busy. I recognized the pattern the way I recognized errors in a payroll report, not from any single number, but from the shape of them together. Too many questions in too short a window. Too much concern from people who had no particular reason to be concerned unless someone had given them one. On the fourth day, Sandra's car pulled into my driveway at 2 p.m. without warning. I watched her walk up the front path from the kitchen window, her coat buttoned wrong, which meant she had left Westport in a hurry, and I felt something in my chest loosen slightly the way it does when someone arrives before you've had to ask. "He called me," she said the moment I opened the door. She stepped inside and grabbed both my hands and held them, and her grip was so tight it made my arthritic knuckles ache and I did not pull away. "Chase called me 3 days ago. He said you'd been forgetting appointments, mixing up dates. He said you'd mentioned changing your will, leaving everything to a charity, and that you'd seemed confused about it afterward, like you didn't remember saying it." My stomach turned over hard. "I never said that." "I know you didn't." Sandra's eyes were bright and fierce and frightened all at once. "Ellie, do you remember what happened to Grandma Voss?" The name landed like a stone dropping into still water. Richard's grandmother, 1987, a brother-in-law who had spent 8 months telling everyone who would listen that the old woman was losing her mind, doctors, neighbors, the family attorney, until he had enough signatures and enough doubt to petition for conservatorship and drain her savings account before anyone thought to look closely at the paperwork. "Chase is doing the same thing," Sandra said, and her voice cracked on the last word splitting open to show the fear underneath. "He's not just stealing money, Ellie. He's building a case, a paper trail. He wants people to believe it before he makes his move, so that when he does, it looks like everyone already knew." I sat down at the kitchen table because my legs had decided they were done holding me up for the moment. Sandra sat across from me and kept both hands wrapped around mine, and the radiator knocked in the corner, and outside the wind was moving hard off the sound. "What do you need?" she asked. "Tell me exactly what you need, and I'll do it." I looked at my sister, the person who had driven an hour without buttoning her coat correctly because she was too worried to waste time on buttons, and I felt a rush of something so strong it made my eyes sting. "I need a lawyer," I said. "Not Arthur. Someone who handles this specific kind of fight. Elder financial abuse, asset protection, someone who has been in this exact room before and knows the way out." Sandra was already reaching for her phone. "I know someone," she said. "Arthur mentioned his name to me last week. Nathan Cole. He's in Greenwich." She dialed before I could answer, and for the first time in 2 weeks I felt something shift, not hope exactly, but the thing that comes just before hope. The sense that the ground beneath you, however unsteady, is still there. Nathan Cole's first sentence was not, "How are you holding up?" or "I'm so sorry this is happening." It was, "Tell me everything in chronological order, starting from the night of your birthday dinner." I liked him immediately. His office was on the second floor of a brick building on Greenwich Avenue, 3 blocks from Arthur's. No artwork on the walls, just bookshelves, a whiteboard covered in handwritten notes, and a desk so covered in organized stacks of paper that it looked less like a workspace and more like a system that only made sense to the person running it. Nathan was 50 Navy suit, firm handshake, the kind of eye contact that meant he was actually listening and not simply waiting for his turn to speak. I talked for 50 minutes. He interrupted twice, once to clarify a date, once to ask me to repeat the exact wording Chase had used at the birthday dinner. He wrote everything down in a small notebook with a mechanical pencil, and when I finished, he flipped back to the first page and read his own notes in silence for nearly 2 minutes. Then he looked up. "You've been running a one-woman investigation for 2 weeks." "I've been doing what made sense," I said. "It made a great deal of sense," he said. "And it gives us considerably more to work with than most people walk in here with." He set the notebook down. "Here's where we are. You have 2 parallel tracks. The criminal track, the medication, the mortgage fraud, the documentary forgery that belongs to Kowalski and the DA's office now. You don't control the timeline there. What you do control is the civil track, and that's where we move immediately." He pulled a yellow legal pad from his drawer and began writing as he talked. First, revoke Chase's joint account authorization through the bank effective immediately with a formal letter of notification. Second, petition the court for a temporary freeze on any shared assets while the investigation was active, a standard protective order in elder financial abuse cases under Connecticut Statute 53A 1-19G. Third, update her estate documents with proper witnesses, a notary, and a paper trail. So clean, it could withstand any future challenge. How long does all of this take? I asked. The account revocation today. The court ordered 2 to 3 days if we file this afternoon, which we will. He looked at me over the top of his glasses. Chase is going to feel this the moment it hits. He'll know you've lawyered up. He'll move. Let him, I said. Nathan almost smiled. Arthur said you'd say something like that. We spent another hour going through documents. By the time I left his office, 3 protective motions were already drafted, and the account revocation letter was being faxed to Greenwich Banking and Trust. That evening, as I was heating soup, I didn't particularly want my phone buzzed. A number I now recognized Harper's secondary line, the one she used when she didn't want Chase to see the call log. I answered. Her voice was barely above a whisper, the tight, careful whisper of someone speaking in a room where they couldn't be overheard. Mrs. Voss, Chase sent invitations out this afternoon, a dinner party, Saturday night, at your house. A pause that stretched 1 beat too long. 30 people. He told me it's a family celebration. Another pause. He's also arranged for someone named Dr. Philip Harmon to attend. I set my soup spoon down on the counter. Mrs. Voss. Harper said, her voice dropping even further. Dr. Harmon is a psychiatrist. The kitchen was very warm. I did not feel warm. Thank you, Harper, I said quietly. Don't tell Chase you called. I hung up and stood at the counter for a long moment, my hand still resting on the phone. Then I picked it up again and dialed Arthur. He just made his move, I said when Arthur answered, and I think it's time we made ours. We met the next morning at Nathan's office, Arthur, Nathan, Kowalski, and me. Kowalski arrived first, already holding a paper coffee cup from the diner on the corner, and when I walked in, he looked at me with the careful assessment of a man recalibrating what he thought he knew. I suspected Arthur had told him on the phone the night before that I was steadier than most people would be in my position. I suspected Kowalski had reserved judgment until he could see for himself. Nathan spread everything across the conference table, the bank statements, the mortgage application, the lab results, the email chain from Chase's account, Harper's video on a laptop angled so we could all see it. Kowalski watched the 40-second clip twice without expression. Then he closed the laptop and said, "Tell me about Dr. Philip Harmon." Arthur answered. Harmon was a psychiatrist in private practice in Westport, not well known, not particularly distinguished, the kind of professional whose career had plateaued quietly in his early 50s. Arthur had made 3 phone calls that morning. He has a history of billing irregularities. Arthur said, his voice carrying the precise weight of someone who had chosen those words deliberately, the kind that suggests he's not unfamiliar with adjusting his professional opinion to suit whoever is paying for it. So Chase found someone willing to sign a competency evaluation, Nathan said. That's my read, Arthur said. Kowalski tapped the table once with 2 fingers. Here's what I can tell you. Based on what we have, the medication, tampering the mortgage fraud, filing the forged documents, I have enough to go to a judge for an arrest warrant today. I've already drafted the application. He looked at me. But I want to ask you something first. Do you want us to pick him up before Saturday, or do you want to let him walk into that party first? The room held its breath. I thought about Chase standing in my living room in front of 30 people who had trusted me for years, delivering his careful speech about a mother who was losing her mind. I thought about what it would mean for all of those people to leave that party still believing him. Let him finish, I said. Let him say every word he's planned to say. And then let's make sure every person in that room understands exactly what they were invited to witness. Kowalski nodded slowly. Then I'll have the warrants signed and ready. My partner and I will be outside in an unmarked vehicle. You give Arthur the signal, Arthur gives me a call. One more thing, Nathan said, looking at me. Chase still has a key to your house. That's how he's planning the party without your permission. After Saturday, change every lock. I said I would. That evening, Sandra came over and stayed the night. We sat on the back porch after dinner with decaf coffee and the kind of quiet that exists between two people who have known each other long enough that silence carries its own conversation. The sound was dark and wide and calm, and somewhere out on the water, a boat moved slowly through the dark, its light a steady amber point. "You don't have to go through with it," Sandra said. "I know," I said. She turned to look at me, her coffee cup held in both hands. "Are you scared?" I thought about it honestly. "No," I said. "I spent 2 weeks being scared. I think I'm done with that part." Sandra looked at me for a long moment. Then she reached over and squeezed my hand once hard and let go. "Richard would have loved watching this," she said quietly. I looked out at the water. "Yes," I said. "He really would have." Before I tell you what happened, the night of that dinner party comment, ready if you are still here. 30 people were in that house. Chase believed he had already won. He did not know his mother had been planning longer. Note the scenes ahead include some elements crafted for storytelling purposes. If you prefer to stop here, that is completely your choice. They began arriving at 6:30. I watched from the upstairs hallway, standing back far enough from the railing that no one below could see me. The living room filled slowly, voices layering over each other, the clink of glasses, the particular sound of people who have been told this is a celebration and are behaving accordingly. Chase had borrowed the caterer from the Westport firm he used for client events. The appetizers were passed on silver trays. The lighting was warm and flattering. He had done all of this in my house, with my furniture under my roof. I recognized nearly every face. Martin and Carol Burgess from 2 houses down, who had been coming to my 4th of July parties for 9 years. David Okafor, who ran the business association and whose payroll I had managed for 6. 3 people from Chase's firm, 2 attorneys I knew from Richard's professional circle, and standing near the fireplace with a glass of sparkling water and no expression at all, Dr. Philip Harmon in a brown suit that looked like it had been pressed specifically for this occasion. Sandra appeared in the hallway beside me. She had changed into a dark blouse and her face was absolutely composed, but she reached out and gripped my forearm once without looking at me. "Arthur's at the corner table," she murmured. "He got here early. He said to tell you everything is ready." Below us, Chase moved through the room with the easy confidence of a man who believed the evening was already decided. He touched shoulders, laughed at things, people said, refilled glasses. He steered certain guests, the attorneys, the business association people, the neighbors who had known me longest into quiet corners for brief conversations that I was too far away to hear but could read in the careful attention on their faces. He was not celebrating. He was campaigning. Harper stood near the kitchen doorway holding a glass she never drank from. Once she looked up toward the staircase. Our eyes met for just a moment before she looked away. At 7:15, Chase moved to the center of the room. He picked up a small bell from the mantel, my bell, the one Richard had brought back from a conference in Boston in 2003, and rang it twice. The room settled. "Thank you all for being here tonight." His voice was warm and unhurried, pitched to carry without effort the voice of a man completely at ease. "Most of you know my mother. You know what she built, what she's meant to this community, what she's meant to me." He paused, and his expression shifted into something carefully calibrated concern, worn like a well-tailored garment. Which is why it's been so hard these past few months watching her struggle, watching her become someone who isn't quite herself. Several faces in the room turned grave. David Okafor set his glass down. "I think most of you have noticed," Chase continued. "I think some of you have been worried, and I want you to know." The first footstep on the staircase was very quiet. The second one was not. By the 5th step, the room had gone completely still, and 30 people were looking up at a woman in a red suit descending the staircase of her own home with the unhurried certainty of someone who had never once considered not showing up. I reached the bottom step and looked directly at my son. "Who told you?" I said, my voice carrying cleanly across every corner of that room, that I wasn't thinking clearly. Chase recovered faster than I expected. He always had been quick. Even as a boy, he could find his footing in the middle of a fall, turn a stumble into a pivot, a mistake, into something that looked deliberate. He did it now, his expression shifting from startled to relieved in the space of a breath, a smile breaking across his face like he had been hoping for exactly this. Mom. His voice was warm, delighted, even-pitched to carry to every corner of the room. You're up. You're feeling better. I'm so glad. Come down. Come join us. He started toward me with his arms slightly open, the way you move towards someone fragile, someone you're managing. I watched him come and felt something in my chest go absolutely cold. I've been feeling fine, Chase, I said. I've been feeling fine for quite some time. He reached the bottom of the staircase and lowered his voice, dropping it just enough that the nearest guests would hear the intimacy of it without catching every word. Mom, I know you're upset, but this isn't the time or the place to— I disagree, I said at full volume. I think this is exactly the time and place. He flinched, just barely, just enough. I stepped past him and walked to the center of the room. 30 faces looked back at me, some confused, some alarmed, some with the careful blankness of people trying to determine which direction things were going before they committed to a reaction. I recognized every single one of them. Patricia Moore had used that exact word when she called me outside the police station. Confused. I had not forgotten it. I looked around the room. I had managed payroll for 6 of these people. I had attended the funerals of their parents and the graduations of their children and the openings of their businesses. I looked at Dr. Philip Harmon standing near the fireplace with his untouched glass of sparkling water. He met my gaze and held it for exactly 2 seconds before something in his expression shifted, a micro-expression, the kind that passes too quickly for most people to catch. I caught it. 30 years of reviewing numbers that people hoped you wouldn't look at too closely had made me very good at catching things people hoped you wouldn't catch. Dr. Harmon, I said clearly, I understand you were invited tonight to assess my mental competency. I'd like to save you the trip. The room made a sound, not a gasp, not quite, but something collective and sharp. A sudden intake of breath from 30 people simultaneously processing a sentence they had not expected. Chase stepped forward. Mom, I'm almost finished, I said, and something in my voice made him stop. I looked out at the room at David Okafor at the attorneys from Richard's Circle at Martin and Carol Burgess, who had borrowed my ladder 3 weeks ago and brought it back with a plate of Christmas cookies. Good people. People who deserved the truth. My son invited you here tonight, I said, because he believed I would be too confused to show up. I want you to know I have never been confused. Not once. I paused. But I have been patient, and I am done being patient. Then I turned and looked at Arthur. He was already on his feet. He crossed the room to the AV panel beside the bookshelf, the one Chase had set up, himself not realizing whose house he was setting it up in, and pressed the input button. The screen behind the fireplace blinked once. Then it came on. The first image on the screen was my bathroom medicine cabinet. Not abstract, not complicated. Just a cabinet that 30 people in that room immediately recognized as belonging to the house they were standing in, filmed from an angle suggesting a small lens placed high and to the left, behind a row of folded towels on the shelf above the sink. Then Chase walked into frame. The room made a sound I had never heard before and hoped to never hear again, something between a sharp breath and a low collective recoil. 30 people understanding simultaneously that what they were watching was real. Chase on screen opened the cabinet, removed a prescription bottle, reached into his jacket pocket and produced a small plastic bag of white tablets, worked methodically, unhurriedly the way a person works when they believe they are completely alone, replaced several tablets, recapped the bottle, put it back, left the frame, 40 seconds. That was all. The screen cut to my own account records, 4 transfers of $50,000 each, highlighted in red, the destination account subpoenaed and traced by investigators to a cryptocurrency exchange registered in Delaware. Then the audio began. Chase's voice unmistakable. Give me 2 more weeks. I'll have the house signed over. She won't fight it once the doctor signs the competency form. A pause. I know what you're owed, Victor. 2 weeks. Dr. Philip Harmon set his glass on the mantel with extreme care and walked quietly toward the back hallway. The room simply parted and let him go the way a body rejects something it recognizes as foreign. Chase stood in the center of the room with a face I had never seen on him before. Not anger, not calculation. Just a man watching something he had built very carefully come apart in under 3 minutes. These are, his voice cracked, this has been edited. This is not what it, Chase. David Okafor's voice came from the back of the room, quiet and flat. Stop. Chase stopped. Harper had not moved from the kitchen doorway. She was gripping the doorframe with both hands, knuckles bone-white tears running freely down her face in the kind of crying that makes no sound because the body is too overwhelmed to produce one. Then the front door opened. Detective Kowalski walked in, badge on his belt, his partner one step behind. He found Chase across the room and crossed to him without hurrying. Chase Voss, I have a warrant for your arrest. The handcuffs made a very small sound, smaller than I had imagined, smaller than it should have been for everything they represented. Chase turned to me, jaw-shaking eyes wet. Mom, please. I walked toward him, stopped close enough to straighten his collar, and I did my fingers moving by 34 years of habit, then looked at him steadily. You told me she wasn't my daughter, and I had no place correcting her. I held his gaze. You were right about one thing, Chase. I should have known my place a long time ago. I stepped back. This is it. Kowalski turned him toward the door. The front door closed behind Kowalski and Chase with a sound so ordinary it felt wrong. Not a slam, not a dramatic punctuation mark to match everything that had preceded it. Just the soft mechanical click of a latch catching the same sound it made every morning when I left, to get the newspaper every evening when I came home from a client meeting. The house had no way of knowing that this particular closing of this particular door was different from every other time. The room did not applaud. No one cheered. This was not a movie, and these were not people who had come here for a resolution. They had come for a celebration and found themselves witnesses to something they would be processing for weeks. David Okafor was the first person to move. He crossed the room to me unhurriedly, and when he reached me, he took both my hands in his, the way people do when words haven't arrived yet, but presence is required. Ellie, he said. That was all. Just my name spoken with the weight of 11 years of Tuesday morning payroll calls and birthday cards, and the kind of professional trust that turns quietly and without announcement into something more. I know, I said. Thank you for being here. He nodded once and went to find his coat. The others followed in ones and twos. Some stopped to speak to me briefly, a hand on my arm, a murmured, "Call me," and some simply moved to the door with the careful quiet of people who understood that the most respectful thing they could do was leave. The caterers began gathering trays. The warm lighting Chase had arranged suddenly seemed excessive, too golden, too celebratory for what the room had become. Harper was gone. I didn't know when she had slipped out, only that the kitchen doorway was empty now the door frame she had been gripping released back to being just a door frame. Arthur stayed. Sandra stayed. When the last guest had gone and the caterers had packed their things and let themselves out through the back, the three of us stood in my living room amid the evidence of a party that had not gone the way its host had planned. Half-empty glasses, a dessert tray. No one had touched the silver bell from Richard's Boston conference, still sitting on the mantel where Chase had set it down. Sandra picked up the bell. She turned it over in her hands once gently and set it back exactly where it belonged. "Are you all right?" Arthur asked me. I thought about the question seriously before I answered it. My hands ached. My back was beginning to remind me that I had been standing for 2 hours. My chest felt simultaneously emptied out and too full, like a room where all the furniture has been moved and you're not yet sure where anything should go. "I think so," I said. "I think I will be." Arthur put his coat on and squeezed my shoulder at the door. "I'll call you in the morning." He looked at me for a moment, the look of a man who had made a promise to a friend 26 years ago and had just finished keeping it. "He would be proud of you, Eleanor." I could not speak, so I nodded and he went. Sandra stayed another hour. She washed the glasses while I sat at the kitchen table, and neither of us needed to fill the quiet with anything. When she finally hugged me at the door, she held on for a long time, and I let her, my face pressed against her shoulder, my eyes burning with tears I had been holding since 7:14 that morning when Arthur called with the lab results. After she left, I turned off the downstairs lights and stood at the kitchen window for a long time. Outside, Long Island Sound lay dark and still and enormous, indifferent to everything that had happened in this house tonight in the way that only very old and very large bodies of water can be. A light moved slowly across the far distance, a boat or a buoy or something I couldn't name from here. Richard, I thought. I kept the house. 8 months is a long time. It is also, I have learned exactly how long it takes for a life to quietly put itself back together when you stop spending all your energy holding someone else's together. The plea agreement was signed on a Tuesday morning in July in a courtroom on the 4th floor of the Fairfield County Courthouse in Bridgeport. Nathan had prepared me for the room, the wood paneling, the fluorescent lighting, the particular institutional quiet that settles over places where consequential things happen so regularly that the walls have stopped paying attention. What he had not prepared me for was the experience of sitting 12 feet away from my son while a judge read aloud the terms of what his life was going to look like for the next 9 years. Chase stood at the defense table in a gray suit. I did not recognize someone else's clothes from a version of his life I had not been part of. He did not look at me when he entered. He did not look at me when the judge spoke. When the gavel came down and it was over, he turned just once, just briefly, and the look on his face was not anger, not defiance, not the cold calculation I had seen across so many tables over the past 8 months. It was just grief. Plain and unadorned, the look of someone who had lost something they could not get back and knew it and had nothing left to say about it. I looked back at him steadily. I did not feel what I had expected to feel, not triumph, not relief, not the clean closure that people imagine justice delivers. I felt something quieter and stranger, something that might, given enough time, become peace. Nathan found me in the hallway afterward. The restitution order covers $140,000. The remaining $60,000 went into the crypto exchange before we could freeze it. I'm sorry we couldn't get all of it. You got what could be gotten, I said. He nodded. Dr. Harmon surrendered his license to the Connecticut Medical Board, and Harper, she's in Providence now. She found a job. She sent you something. He handed me a plain envelope. Inside was a single note card in Harper's careful handwriting. I know sorry isn't enough, but I am. H. I folded it and put it in my coat pocket and did not throw it away. Spring came late to Greenwich that year. By April, the roses Richard had planted along the back fence were budding slow and determined the way roses always are after a hard winter. I was in the garden on a Saturday afternoon when Arthur arrived carrying 2 cups of tea. He looked at me, crouched in the dirt with my gardening gloves on, and said, "You look like yourself." "I feel like myself," I said, and meant it for the first time in a long time. We sat on the porch steps and drank our tea and watched the afternoon settle over the water, and I thought about what it meant to keep a house, not the building, not the deed, not the account balances, but the life inside it. The ordinary weight of a Saturday afternoon, the sound of a child on a bicycle somewhere down the street, tea on the porch steps with someone who has known you long enough to sit beside you without needing to say anything at all. I had kept all of it. There is something nobody tells you about betrayal, not the discovery of it. People write about that part endlessly. What they never write about is the morning after, when the adrenaline has burned itself out and the lawyers have filed their papers, and you are standing in your kitchen at 6 a.m. with a cup of coffee, and the house is quiet, and you realize that the hardest part was never what was done to you. The hardest part is understanding why you let it go on as long as you did. I have sat with that question on early mornings and late evenings, and the answer I keep arriving at is simpler than I expected and more painful. I let it go on because I loved him. Not blindly. I am not a woman who does things blindly, But I loved him with the particular generosity that parents extend to children, the willingness to read every piece of evidence in the most forgiving light available, because the alternative is a grief you are not ready to carry. I was not blind. I was hopeful. And hope, when it is misplaced, can look a great deal like foolishness from the outside. But here is what I know now, sitting on this porch with my coffee going cold and the sound doing what it has always done, indifferent and eternal, and blue hope was never the problem. What made me vulnerable was the belief that love required me to keep extending it regardless of what came back. It does not. Love is not a contract with no exit clause. Kindness is not an obligation that compounds with interest. God did not ask me to disappear in the service of someone else's choices. He asked me to be faithful, to be loving, to be present. Those are not the same thing as being a source that never runs dry. I kept this house. I kept the roses Richard planted badly and tended carefully. I kept the porch and the water and the quiet that belongs only to me now. And I kept myself, which in the end was the only thing Chase had truly been trying to take. If you recognize something in Eleanor's story today, that feeling of giving past the point of reason, of slowly funding the very thing that was dismantling, you hear this clearly. You are not foolish. You are someone who loved. But there is a difference between an open hand and a hand that has forgotten it is allowed to close. Close it. Not in anger. Not to punish anyone. Close it because you are worth protecting. Close it because the life you have built deserves someone who will take care of it. If this story reached you, share it. Leave a thought in the comments. And stay with us. We will always be here. Looking back at this family drama, I have one thing to say to myself, and maybe to you. Don't be like me. Don't wait until the accounts are empty and the signature is forged. Don't let family drama quietly drain everything you built. And don't convince yourself that love means having no limits, because that's not love. That's disappearing. Every family drama begins the same way someone mistakes your kindness for permission. Revenge stories with mom shouldn't exist. A mother's love should be the safest harbor, not a target. But if you've lived through your own revenge stories with mom, you already know the wound runs deeper than money. These revenge stories with mom don't end in courtrooms. They end in kitchens at 6 a.m. with cold coffee and the quiet work of starting over. God reminded me sometimes through pain that I was never meant to disappear for anyone. My personal opinion: you are allowed to close the account. You are allowed to keep the house. You are allowed to choose yourself. If this story reached you, share it. Comment and subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Thank you for staying until the very end. Heads up, upcoming stories contain fictional elements built for reflection and life lessons. If that's not your preference, no judgment at all. Choose what truly serves your peace.